Okay, so are you ready to dive into the world of big promises and even bigger lies? And that fine line between visionary and con artist? Buckle up, because today we're going to unpack the fascinating rise and fall of Elizabeth Holmes and her company Theranos.
It's a story that makes you think, was she a brilliant innovator or a master manipulator? We're going to really dissect her motives and her actions and ultimately her legacy.
Exactly. Was she like changing the world or just lining her pockets?
Yeah.
That's the question that we're here to answer, grifter or gifted. This deep dive is going to take us through Holmes's journey from Stanford dropout to Silicon Valley darling and how she convinced the world that her technology could revolutionize blood testing.
And of course, we have to look at what caused Theranos to just crumble, leaving all those disillusioned investors, and a lot of questions about the very nature of ambition.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. Elizabeth Holmes was born in Washington, D.C. Her father worked in government energy and her mother held government positions, including working with USAI. Seems like she was exposed to a world of big ideas from a young age.
Yeah, and what's interesting is even as a child, Holmes was fixated on Steve Jobs. She had this intense drive to leave her own mark on the world, just like her idol.
Right, and that ambition led her to Stanford, where she studied chemical engineering. But then, bam, she drops out at just 19 to pursue her dream of revolutionizing healthcare. Talk about a risk taker.
That takes a certain level of self-belief for sure. In 2003, she founded Real-Time Cures, which later became Theranos. Her goal was to develop technology that could run hundreds of blood tests using just a finger prick of blood.
Imagine that just a tiny pinprick could unlock hundreds of health insights. Who wouldn't want that? The potential impact was huge, and that's what made the Theranos story so captivating. It tapped into our desire for a better future for healthcare.
While the idea was incredibly appealing, it's important to remember that traditional blood tests, they rely on larger samples for a reason. Accuracy and reliability are paramount in medical diagnostics, and those often require a certain volume of blood.
But Holmes was a master storyteller. She had this Steve Jobs-esque aura about her wearing black turtlenecks and speaking in a deep voice. She crafted a compelling narrative that drew in some serious investors.
And they weren't just any investors, right? We're talking big names like Rupert Murdoch, the media mogul, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, and the DeVos family. These are people who know how to spot a good investment. So what was it about Holmes that convinced them?
It seems like it was a perfect storm of charisma, a revolutionary idea, and the promise of disrupting a multi-billion-dollar industry. Theranos was the kind of story that investors dream of being a part of.
Plus, there's the allure of Silicon Valley itself, a place where groundbreaking innovation seems to happen every day. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement and the optimism surrounding these tech startups.
Totally. And Theranos was seemingly on a rocket ship to success. By 2014, the company was valued at a staggering $9 billion. And Elizabeth Holmes was hailed as the youngest self-made female billionaire. She was on magazine covers, giving TED Talks, being praised as a visionary leader. It seemed like nothing could stop her.
But as we know, things were not as they seemed. Beneath the polished facade, cracks were beginning to appear. Whispers of doubt started circulating within the company. Employees began to question the accuracy of the technology and the validity of Theranos' claims.
So basically, the technology wasn't living up to the hype. Was this a case of ambition blinding Holmes to reality, or was there something more sinister at play?
Some employees alleged that Theranos was relying on traditional blood testing methods instead of their revolutionary technology for many tests. Remember those investors. Some, including former U.S. Secretary of State George Shultz, started to raise concerns and question Holmes's leadership.
And that's when investigative journalist John Carey-Rue enters the picture.
Mm-hmm.
In 2015, he began publishing a series of exposés in the Wall Street Journal detailing serious problems with Theranos' technology and the company's misleading claims. These articles sent shockwaves through Silicon Valley and beyond.
Carey-Rue's reporting was meticulous and damning. He interviewed former employees, reviewed internal documents, and exposed the truth behind Theranos' facade. It was like watching a carefully constructed house of cards begin to collapse.
And Holmes's response. She went on the offensive, denying the allegations and trying to discredit Carey-Rue and the Wall Street Journal. She even appeared on CNBC, famously saying, "First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world."
It was a classic case of doubling down on the narrative, even in the face of mounting evidence to the contrary. But the tide was turning. The Wall Street Journal articles triggered investigations by regulatory bodies, including the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, and the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC.
Okay, so things are starting to unravel for Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos.
Huh.
Investigations are underway, and the cracks in her carefully crafted image are becoming impossible to ignore.
And this is where the story takes a truly dramatic turn. The question of grifter or gifted becomes even more crucial as we delve into the legal battles and the unraveling of Elizabeth Holmes's empire.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Theranos saga. When we left off, Elizabeth Holmes was facing mounting scrutiny and investigations from regulatory bodies. Was this the moment her carefully constructed facade finally crumbled? Or was she still determined to, cling to her narrative?
Well, remember, those investigations by CMS and the SEC, they didn't go well for Theranos. In
Right.
2016, CMS, they found numerous deficiencies at Theranos' labs, and the SEC launched a formal investigation into the company and its founder. The walls were closing in on Elizabeth Holmes and her empire.
Right, and let's not forget Sonny Balwani. He was Holmes's romantic partner and the president of Theranos. Their relationship was very shrouded in secrecy, and it would later become a significant part of Holmes's defense strategy.
Yeah, their relationship adds another layer of complexity to this whole story. It raises questions about the dynamics of their partnership, the influence they had on each other, and how their personal relationship intertwined with their professional roles.
Okay, so with the SEC investigation looming, things were looking pretty grim for Theranos. What happened next?
Well, in 2018, the SEC, they filed civil fraud charges against both Holmes and Balwani. Essentially, they were accused of misleading investors about the capabilities of their technology and the financial health of Theranos. This marked the beginning of the end for the company.
It's a classic tale of hubris, isn't it? The higher they climb, the harder they fall. But this wasn't just about a company collapsing. It was about the potential harm to patients who relied on Theranos' inaccurate test results.
That's right. You're right. The SEC charges were just the tip of the iceberg. In June 2018, a federal grand jury indicted Holmes and Balwani on multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Now we're talking about criminal charges, and the stakes just got a whole lot higher.
So what exactly were they accused of doing?
Well, prosecutors argued that Holmes and Balwani, they knowingly misrepresented the capabilities of their technology and the financial health of Theranos to secure investments and partnerships. They were essentially accused of just straight up lying to get what they wanted, and those lies had serious consequences.
So they were accused of defrauding both investors and patients. That's a very serious allegation, especially when you consider the potential impact on people's health.
Absolutely. Investors lost millions, and patients, they received inaccurate blood test results, which could have had devastating health implications. This case raised questions about the ethical boundaries of Silicon Valley's fake it till you make it culture and potential consequences of unchecked ambition.
So with these serious charges hanging over their heads, what happened to Holmes and Balwani?
Well, their trials were separated, and Holmes's trial began in August 2021 in California. It was a total media sensation. The world was watching to see if the Silicon Valley star would be held accountable for her actions.
It must have been quite a spectacle.
It was. The courtroom was packed with journalists, spectators, legal experts. The prosecution, they presented a mountain of evidence, including internal emails, financial documents, and witness testimonies that painted a very clear picture of deception and fraud at the heart of Theranos.
And how did Elizabeth Holmes defend herself against these charges? Did she admit to any wrongdoing, or did she maintain her innocence?
Her defense strategy was really complex and pretty controversial. She claimed she had been misled by others at Theranos, particularly Sonny Balwani. She portrayed herself as a naive entrepreneur who had been manipulated and abused by her older, more experienced partner.
So she was kind of shifting the blame. Was this a genuine attempt to defend herself, or was it a calculated move to save her own skin?
It's hard to say for sure. She also maintained that she genuinely believed in the potential of Theranos' technology and that she never intentionally misled anyone. It was a delicate balancing act, trying to take responsibility while also presenting herself as a victim.
It sounds like a classic case of a charismatic leader using their persuasive powers to influence the narrative even in the face of overwhelming evidence.
Exactly. The jury had to decide whether they believed Elizabeth Holmes was a visionary who just made mistakes or a calculated con artist who intentionally deceived investors and patients. It was a really tough call, and the verdict reflected that complexity.
So after months of testimony and deliberation, what was the verdict? Did the jury side with Elizabeth Holmes, or did they find her guilty of the charges against her?
Well, on January 3rd, 2022, the jury found Elizabeth Holmes guilty on 4 counts of defrauding investors. However, they were unable to reach a unanimous verdict on the 4 counts of defrauding patients, resulting in a mistrial on those charges.
So kind of a mixed verdict. Guilty of defrauding investors, but not of defrauding patients. What happened next?
Well, in November 2022, Judge Edward Davila sentenced Holmes to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. This was followed by 3 years of supervised release.
Wow, that's a pretty significant sentence, especially considering she was acquitted on some charges.
Yeah.
What about Sunny Balwani? What was his fate?
His trial began 2 months after Holmes's conviction. Balwani maintained his innocence, denying the allegations of abuse and manipulation by Holmes and arguing that he had acted in good faith while at Theranos. However, in July 2022, he was convicted on all 12 felony counts of fraud and conspiracy facing him.
So both Holmes and Balwani were ultimately found guilty of very serious crimes. It seems like justice was served. But this story raises so many questions about ambition deception and that fine line between brilliance and manipulation.
It does, and it's a reminder that even the most charismatic leaders can be capable of great harm. The Theranos saga is a real cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the importance of holding those in power accountable for their actions.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the Theranos saga. We've seen the rise and fall of Elizabeth Holmes, that allure of her narrative and all the legal battles. But now where do we go from here? What about the lasting impact of this captivating story?
Well, after those convictions, Holmes and Balwani, they faced, significant prison sentences. Balwani, he got 12 years and 11 months, while Holmes was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months. These sentences really reflect how serious their crimes were and the impact that their deception had on investors and the healthcare industry as a whole.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast from that image of Holmes as a Silicon Valley darling, gracing magazine covers, being hailed as this visionary leader. It makes you wonder, was she really a true believer in her own narrative, or was it all a calculated act of manipulation?
That's the question, isn't it? Did she start out with genuine intentions that just kind of got warped by ambition, or was she a con artist, like right from the get-go? The lines can be so blurry, especially in a world where charisma and a compelling story can often mask, underlying motives.
And what about the impact on the patients who relied on Theranos's blood tests? We've talked about the potential harm, but were there any specific cases where people's lives were really affected by these inaccurate results?
Oh, yeah. There were several instances where patients received false positives or negatives, leading to unnecessary anxiety and stress and potentially harmful medical decisions. There was one woman, for example, she was told that she had miscarried based on a Theranos test, only to later find out that she was still pregnant. These real-life consequences highlight that ethical responsibility that comes with developing and marketing healthcare technologies.
It's a reminder that innovation without integrity can have some really devastating consequences. The Theranos saga has definitely left a mark on the healthcare industry. Has it changed the way that investors approach health tech startups?
Oh, absolutely. There's definitely a heightened sense of caution and a lot more scrutiny now. Investors are much more diligent in their due diligence, demanding more evidence and proof of concept before they're going to commit any funds. The days of just being swept away by a charismatic founder and a captivating story, they're over.
So in a way, the Theranos scandal has been a wake-up call, forcing the industry to prioritize transparency and accountability. But has all this increased scrutiny stifled innovation in any way?
It's a tough balance. While increased scrutiny is crucial to prevent these future scandals, excessive skepticism could also hinder the development of groundbreaking technologies. Legitimate companies with genuine solutions, they might face more hurdles in securing funding and navigating regulatory processes.
So the legacy of Theranos is a complicated one. It exposed the dangers of unchecked ambition and the allure of a really compelling narrative, but it also prompted a necessary shift toward, greater accountability in the healthcare industry.
Exactly. It's a story that continues to fascinate and generate a lot of debate. Was Elizabeth Holmes really a visionary who just lost her way? Or a master manipulator who preyed on the hopes and fears of investors and patients? It's up to each individual to decide where they stand on that spectrum of grifter or gifted.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the Theranos saga, what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What can we learn from this tale of ambition, deception, and the pursuit of innovation?
Well, I think the Theranos story really highlights how important critical thinking and skepticism are, especially in a world that's so saturated with information and persuasive narratives. We need to be really wary of those charismatic leaders and all their promises of revolutionary breakthroughs. Demand evidence, ask tough questions. Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo.
It's also a reminder that ethical considerations should always be at the forefront of innovation, especially in fields like healthcare, where people's lives are at stake. The pursuit of progress should never come at the cost of integrity and transparency.
And finally, the Theranos saga shows us how important accountability is. We need to hold individuals and institutions responsible for their actions, regardless of their charisma or their influence. A culture of accountability is essential to foster trust and ensure that innovation actually benefits society as a whole.
The Theranos story is a cautionary tale, but it also offers valuable lessons for entrepreneurs, investors, and anyone navigating the complexities of innovation and ambition in today's world. So the next time you encounter a really captivating narrative or a charismatic leader who's promising to change the world, remember the lessons of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos.
Right. Ask yourself, are they truly gifted or are they just a grifter? The answer may not always be clear, but that process of questioning and critical thinking is essential to protect ourselves and ensure that innovation serves its true purpose to make the world a better place.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the Theranos saga. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and keep asking those tough questions.